This afternoon's proceedings are being live streamed. Those with electronic devices may use them to report what is going on in the hearing room, but only after 10 minutes have elapsed since the event that they're reporting. Such devices may not be used for recording or photography. Mr. Barr.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Coles, I'm going to turn now to the Tradecraft manual.
Yes.
You told us yesterday that when you joined the SDS, you do not recall any written guidance.
Correct.
Did that change at all at any point in time before you put pen to paper in 1995?
I wasn't aware of anything until I put pen to paper, as you say.
A question now about the genesis of that document. If we go in File 4, Tab B, Roman numeral 5, 4, 37372, going to take you to an extract from Bob Lambert's statement as a manager. About 5 lines down after introducing the topic of the Tradecraft manual, he has written, "My recollection is that Andy Coles suggested to me that him providing a note of his experiences for the benefit of future field officers might be a good idea, and that I agreed." Is that how the Tradecraft manual came about?
I think that's right, yeah.
And is it right that it was intended to be guidance to future field officers provided by former field officers?
Yes, or the best and the worst of one's experiences, yeah.
When you drafted it, did Detective Inspector Lambert read it?
I guess so.
Did he approve it?
I handed it in at the end of the process, and that was the end of it, I'm afraid.
So you wouldn't be able to help us as to whether he amended it?
It was supposed to be a live document, so I think people added stuff afterwards.
Are you able to assist us whether DCI Edmondson read what you wrote?
I don't know.
Would you expect both of those men to have done so?
I would have hoped so, yes.
Do you know whether knowledge of the Tradecraft manual and its contents went any further up the chain of command?
I don't know that.
Can we go to the manual itself? So if we take down the present document and go in Volume 3, Tab B, Roman numeral 3, 5, document number 527597. This is the cover page.
Yeah.
Special Demonstration Squad Tradecraft Manual. Does what it says on the tin?
Indeed.
Over the page, table of contents. I understand from your witness statement that you drafted this. Is that right?
I think the table I did, and some of the content, but not everything. I'm not entirely sure that all of it was, and things were added on, so it may not be that all of it was.
Yeah, there are certainly some documents later on, particularly from the Reaper age, which plainly post-date your time. If we could go now to page 8 in the electronic file, please. This is a section entitled Preparation. Did you draft this?
It looks like my writing, yeah. Looks like my style.
So if we start with paragraph 3.1.1, please, under the subheading name.
Yes.
By tradition, the aspiring SDS officer's first major task on joining the back office was to spend hours and hours in St Catherine's House, leafing through death registers in search of a name he could call his own. On finding a suitable ex-person, usually a deceased child or young person with a fairly anonymous name, the circumstances of his or her untimely demise was investigated. The phrase, a suitable ex-person, yours?
I would think so, yes.
If death was natural or otherwise unspectacular and therefore unlikely to be findable in newspapers or other public records, the SDS officer would apply for a copy of the dead person's birth certificate. Further research would follow to establish the respiratory status of the dead person's family. Your words?
I'm a bit concerned about the typo there. That wouldn't be me, but I guess so, yeah.
If any, and if they were still breathing, where they were living. If all was suitably obscure and there was little chance of the SDS officer, or more importantly, one of the wearies, a well-used phrase within the SDS?
Commonly used, yeah.
Running into the dead person's parents, siblings, etc., the SDS officer would assume squatter's rights over the unfortunate's identity for the next 4 years.
Yes.
Your words.
I think so, yeah.
And putting the tone to one side, that's an accurate summary of the traditional approach to building a legend using a deceased child's identity.
Yes, that's right.
Could we now go to file 4, tab B, Roman numeral 5.1, 37317. This is an extract from Peter Francis's witness statement for Tranche 3. If we could expand the text, please. I was aware the binder was updated by Andy Coles sometime while I was deployed in the field. It appears he has a different recollection to you that there was already a binder that you were updating. That's not your recollection, is it?
I'm not entirely sure whether there were other reports, but it wasn't formally called a Tradecraft manual, if you like. But he might be right in that. Actually, there were other documents, yeah.
I did not bother to go back and read his updates at that time, so had never seen the document MPS 527597, the Coles update. That's a document we were just looking at.
Right.
I never read anything in the binder I saw that was as jarring as what I read in the Coles update. There are a whole series of nasty comments that were never contained within the version we had at the time I was in the back office. For example, references to carrying out research to establish the respiratory status of relatives of the deceased child whose identity one was stealing, and an assertion that SDS officers assumed squatters' rights over a deceased person's identity. I believe some of the language used, in particular the condescending comments, are more reflective of Andy Coles himself than the SDS. They are his opinions. They are quite disparaging things to say, and I do not think those were the feelings of the SDS as a unit at the time. First of all, in relation to tone, what is your reaction to what you wrote in the paragraph we were just looking at, now that you know that it has been seen by the relatives of deceased children whose identities were used by SDS officers?
It seems crass and tasteless.
Do you agree with Peter Francis that those words were reflective of you and not the SDS?
Of me at that time, I think, yes.
And you now?
No, I think this was written when I was going through some fairly challenging times on return to normality, and I had certain outbursts of anger and other sorts of behaviours, so I think this is me just not really quite being myself and saying some fairly unnecessarily unpleasant things.
Could we take that down, please, and go back to 527597 at page 8? Thank you. If we could look now at paragraph 3.1.2. All well and good, but we are all familiar with the story of an SDS officer being confronted with his own death certificate. Being careful about anonymity, what was the story?
There was a story of an individual who I think was involved in Irish matters, was confronted with the death certificate of the child whose identity he took on.
The inquiry has heard evidence that an officer who in the mid-1970s infiltrated the Troops Out movement, Rick Clark, was confronted with the death certificate of the child whose identity he had used. Is that the instance that you are referring to?
I guess that is, yes.
And in what way was that example used with new SDS officers when creating their cover identities?
That was generally known in my time of being out there and the other members in the team. I'm assuming that story was a salutary lesson that was told to others, but I couldn't tell you for sure post my term whether that was the case.
Were you given any guidance as to how to avoid the same problem?
It's how to deal with it if the problem came up.
So not
how to represent yourself and how to deal with it, yeah.
Because it might be said that one way of avoiding being confronted with a deceased child's death certificate is not to use a deceased child's identity in the first place.
Exactly, yes.
Was anything said about that?
No.
If we go to paragraph 3.13, please. I'll let you familiarise yourself with it, but it's the last 4 lines that I'm particularly interested in.
I don't believe this is me writing. This seems to be an addition post my deployment.
But it's 1994, so it's before you made your contribution. Are you sure?
I'm not certain, no, but I don't. I'm not entirely sure.
The last few lines, it was considered that a computer system able to match the records of deaths and births quickly and easily, and which was accessible legitimately or otherwise to wearies or hostile inquirers, would make it necessary to change operating procedures.
I didn't put that in there. That's I would have remembered that. No, this is later.
Is what had happened between your starting and your writing your contribution to the Tradecraft manual that the OPCS had computerized its records, making it vastly easier for any future death to do a computer check, which in the past it might have taken days and days?
If ever, because it was a paper record. Yes, you're right. Yeah.
Were you aware by the time that you wrote the Tradecraft manual that the traditional process had come to an end?
No, I wasn't.
Are you sure about that? Because there's clear reference to it in this document.
That's why I'm saying this is post. It was a live document. It was an electronic document. This has been added after my time, I believe.
3.1.5 on the next page. In the past, an identity with a birth certificate was deemed necessary in order to obtain the documentation and paraphernalia associated with everyday life. The birth certificate was used as an identity document, which it is not, on which to base the acquisition of accommodation, driving licence, passport, bank account, etc. A birth certificate is not necessary for provision of any documentation by the office. It is therefore advisable to discontinue the practice of obtaining a birth certificate at all. It follows that an imaginary identity must now be made up by the field officer. This paper seeks to offer tips and guidance in the selection of a new identity. When you were an undercover police officer, there were other officers coming through the back office joining the unit, weren't there?
There were, yes.
Were you aware that there came a time when they abandoned the traditional method and were building their legends in a different way?
No, this is not my entry. It's post my writing.
I wasn't asking you specifically about whether you drafted this. I was asking you if, from your knowledge of discussions with new joiners, you knew that there'd been a change to the way legends were being developed.
No, not at all. No.
Is it right that the benefit of using an imaginary ID is that you, on the one hand, can't be confronted with your death certificate, but that has to be balanced against the disbenefit that you won't have a birth certificate and you might have to explain that?
Yeah.
Were you involved in any of the discussions about that?
No, I wasn't, no.
You, as you said yesterday, did not use the full deceased child's identity.
That's right.
You told us you were disobeying DCI Gray in doing so.
Yes.
You are not the first officer to have given evidence to this inquiry that you didn't follow the traditional practice to the letter.
Yeah.
Are you aware of whether or not there was in fact any discretion as to whether to do so before 1994?
No.
Can we now go to page 27 in the Tradecraft manual? Alcohol and drugs. In the past, alcohol was sometimes a regular lubricant of SDS operations. Nowadays it is simply inappropriate to drink and drive. You will be prosecuted and face a driving ban, and you may well face disciplinary proceedings. Some groups we infiltrate drink heavily, and you will have to participate to a greater or lesser extent when you drink. Don't drive. Stay in your duff and wait until morning. Drugs are in widespread use throughout the alternative scene. You should come to a decision as to whether you use or abstain. And we've already been to your own evidence about what you did.
Yes.
And then it goes on to talk about aspects of dealing with controlled substances, concluding again, if you have to imbibe soft stuff or become stoned through secondary smoking, don't attempt to drive home. Go to the duff and sleep it off.
Yes.
Your advice?
Yes. Well, it's from other policy, but yes, that's me writing that, yeah.
And then you go on, a common fear is that using alcohol or drugs will loosen your tongue and you will give the game away. I can only say that I have been in many states of intoxication during my tour and have never had a problem with basic security. If you don't feel confident, stay on the side of caution and avoid intoxicants as much as possible. The sober driver and the straight-edge activist who never get stoned are far more common in alternative society than one's first impressions indicate.
Yes.
Your words?
Yes, I think so, yeah.
And true?
Yeah.
They suggest that one could conduct an SDS deployment without abusing controlled substances.
Indeed.
Why then is the advice, make up your own mind about whether or not you're going to take them?
I think it's a simple matter of the group you're in and how prevalent it is and whether the social use of cannabis was an alternative to alcohol. This was sort of the common problem, was how do you exist in an environment where regular use of cannabis by your group was common.
But your own advice is you could just play the straight edge activist.
It is possible to do that, yeah, that's right. Depends on your group. For example, in my case, there were 2 individuals that were users that they wanted information on. It would have been strange to have gone there and not have been participating.
Since we're talking about committing a criminal offence,
Yes.
shouldn't the guidance have been either don't do it or don't do it unless you've got to protect your safety?
That would be better advice, but it would sometimes mean you would have to use the alcohol or drugs to build up that relationship. So in an ideal world, you wouldn't have to, but in reality, sometimes it was necessary.
Was there a feeling that because the SDS was an exceptional unit, that the rules could be bent?
I think the view at the time was that it was a necessary evil that was part of and parcel of your job.
5.6, sexual liaisons. The thorny issue of romantic entanglements during a tour is the cause of much soul-searching and concern. In the past, emotional ties to the opposition have happened and caused all sorts of difficulties, including divorce, deception and disciplinary charges. While it is not my place to moralise, one should try to avoid the opposite sex for as long as possible.
Yeah.
Your words?
I think so, yeah.
The heading, sexual liaisons. This section does what it says on the tin. It's advice about sexual liaisons.
I think so, yeah.
Cause of much soul-searching and concern. By whom and when?
It's something that is a challenge that you have to deal with. It's a common difficulty.
And the soul-searching, what did you mean by that?
How one deals with it.
Why do you have to search the soul for that?
But to work out a way of dealing with people while you're out there, particularly those that are interested in developing a relationship with you.
Because there's a moral dimension to this.
Yes, although it's not my place to moralise about what's right and wrong. It's very clear what is right and wrong.
Why is it not the place of a guidance document to moralise and to make clear what is right and wrong?
It is the place of a document. It's not my place as an individual writing.
Try to avoid the opposite sex for as long as possible.
Yes.
That falls quite some distance short of don't, doesn't it?
But one can't, because the groups have female activists within them, so you sometimes get entangled in this sort of thing, my own experience.
The free love attitudes of the 60s and 70s have largely disappeared in the minds of the extremists following herpes, hepatitis, and AIDS. Was that based on your own experience?
No, this comes from a book written by an FBI Undercover in about 1965. I can't remember what it was called now. Deep Cover, I think.
If it was written in 1965...
Long time ago, yeah.
That might have been said to have been in the era where people commonly talk about free love.
Free love, exactly, yeah.
But you're talking here about the 90s with the assertion that free love has largely disappeared. Was that your experience?
I'm referring to that book and the fact that it's completely out of date.
Based on?
The fact that it's completely out of date. 30 years on, it's a completely different society we live in.
Based on your experience of 4 years in the field?
Currently, yes, exactly.
And people were careful about sexually transmitted diseases by this stage because AIDS was a very serious problem.
That's right.
Could we take the document down now, please, and digress for a moment to file 1, tab A4, document number 735546. These are notes of the risk assessor for the purposes of the anonymity process in this inquiry. If we could go to page 3, please. We looked at this document yesterday. I'm interested in the 3rd paragraph down. High instances of promiscuous relationships, STD very frequent and common.
Prevalent, I think that is.
Prevalent and common, sorry. She wanted a personal relationship but wanted to have protective sex. As a vegan, would not use a condom against principles.
Yes, I think I've dealt with that before.
So
Yep.
you did indeed. You are writing in the Tradecraft manual, the free love attitudes of the 60s and 70s have largely disappeared in the minds of the extremists following herpes, hepatitis, and AIDS.
Yes.
You are telling a risk assessor in 2017 that there was a high instance of promiscuous relationships and STDs were prevalent and common.
Yes.
Do you see the discrepancy?
Not really, no. That there are
Is-
free love is a different thing. I think that what I'm referring to here is promiscuity is very different from the free love of the 60s, which is sort of group sex and that sort of thing.
And we went through the references to resisting advances
Yes.
in the past. Is the reality that what you wrote in the Tradecraft manual is an accurate reflection of sexual attitudes in the early 90s, whereas what you said to the risk assessor is not?
I think the Tradecraft manual report was closer than this was. This was some years later. So probably that's more trustworthy than this one here. It's probably to do with some of my my views as an older person.
Or a desire to paint a picture less likely to incriminate you
In
a relationship with Jessica.
no.
Could we take that down, please, and go back to the Tradecraft Manual 527597, page 27. .6.3 at the bottom of the page. While you may try to avoid any sexual encounter, there may come a time when your lack of interest may become suspicious. In these circumstances, you can either try to introduce an appropriate male or female from your own relations or friends to meet the wearies on a few occasions, or ask the office if they can find an ex-SDS, if we can go operative to fill it such a role. Both options are fraught with difficulty and you must make your own mind up about how to proceed. If you have no other option but to become involved with the weary, you should try to have fleeting, disastrous relationships with individuals who are not important to your source of information. One cannot be involved with the weary in a relationship for any period of time without risking serious consequences.
Yes.
First of all, sticking with the early part of that paragraph, was introducing a relation or a friend an option that you ever considered?
That was never part of the opportunities that were provided to deal with this sort of problem.
This is your guidance, isn't it?
Well, I'm just... The officer said they would find an ex-STS operative to fulfil that role, but that's the bit that I remember. The first bit I don't remember writing. That's unusual.
It would be an extraordinary thing to do, wouldn't it?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, very odd.
To put in an untrained civilian
Yes.
to play a role in an undercover police deployment.
Extraordinary, yeah, yeah.
Utterly reckless advice.
Yes.
Are you sure that you did not write that sentence?
I can't be sure. It is just so beyond what was available at the time. It just surprises me to see that.
Well, there's no question of availability. All you need is a friend or relative.
Yeah, exactly. This is not process. This is not policy.
But it's written guidance here.
It's in the guidance document, yes, but again, it was a live document. I don't remember writing this.
Asking the office if they can find an ex-SDS operative to fill such a role, you did mention in your evidence yesterday.
Yeah.
Did you, during your deployment, at any time ask management to find an ex-SDS operative to fill
No.
the role? Was that because, in fact, you were not being bombarded with sexual attention by activists?
By bombarded, that seems as if it's extremely regular. It was occasional, but I didn't require that assistance, no.
Not subject to sufficient interest or temptation sexually to need any cover?
I didn't require it during my deployment. No, that's right.
Both options are fraught with difficulty, and you must make your own mind up about how to proceed. Did you write that?
I don't remember. You must make your own mind about how to proceed. I think that sounds like me. Yeah, it's possible I wrote that, but it's such an odd thing from the earlier statement.
If you have no other option but to become involved with a weary, that contemplates that the advice which will follow is a matter of last resort.
Yes.
And is this a matter of last resort in order to maintain cover?
For security and safety purposes, that's right.
And to remain in the field in order to obtain the necessary intelligence?
It would have to be absolutely necessary. I mean, for your own personal safety and security.
To remain in the field and to continue with the operation?
Well, you'd then have to go to the management team and discuss it. I mean, this was my SO10 policy, actually, come to think of it.
But this document does not address the question of necessary for what purpose, does it?
No, it doesn't, no.
It leaves the reader without any guidance on that. Your own experience was that you had been left to deal with this matter yourself, hadn't you, in
Yes.
the field?
Yeah.
The tenor of this paragraph is very much one of individual discretion, isn't it?
Yes, I think so.
And so the reader might well come away with the understanding that it's necessary to maintain cover or to continue the operation?
Yes.
You should try to have fleeting, disastrous relationships with individuals. That imports a positive choice, doesn't it, to try to have a sexual relationship of a particular kind.
Not a sexual relationship, but a disastrous relationship, one that fails.
A disastrous sexual relationship.
No, not sexual, a disastrous relationship, very brief.
Very brief sexual relationship.
No.
We'll have to go back to paragraph 5.6. If we could just look at the heading, please, and have that blown up.
I can see that, yeah.
Block capitals,
Yeah,
emboldened. You've answered my question already, that this paragraph does what it says on the tin.
yes.
Can we go back to the text, please, at the top of page 28? This is about sexual relationships, isn't it, Mr. Coles?
It doesn't say that, it says relationships.
Mr. Coles, this does not make sense in any other way, does it? If you have no
Disastrous
other
relationship.
option but to become involved with a weary.
Yes,
If after you've ruled out using an ex-SDS officer or a friend or a relation to give you cover,
yes,
you are going to try to have a fleeting, disastrous sexual relationship.
that's not what it says. That's not the intention of that text. It would have said that otherwise.
Because the whole point of an SDS deployment in a non-sexual sense is to get close to the people from whom you wish to extract intelligence.
Yes, that's right.
It is to form close non-sexual relationships.
Friendships, yes.
This paragraph is dealing with sexual relationships.
It's talking about romantic entanglements, that's right, yeah. It's headed sexual liaison.
Your advice to future field officers is that if they have no other option, they should try to have a fleeting, disastrous sexual relationship.
No, a fleeting, disastrous relationships. It's very specific.
With individuals who are not important to your sources of information,
Yes,
which suggests that there is room for the officer to make a choice.
the importance is not to be involved with someone with whom you are working with or involved in infiltration with. So they have to be a player, if you like. Whereas if this proposal that I wrote to have a disastrous relationship should be with someone who's not important to that.
So you choose a person who fits that definition.
Someone who's around the area of the group you're infiltrating, that's right. This is an extremist if it's necessary.
If it's necessary, choose a woman as long as she's not important to your sources of information.
For a disastrous relationship, that's right. It's fleeting, that's correct.
We'll have to agree to differ as to whether
Very good.
it's a disastrous sexual
It's not
relationship.
sexual.
Do you accept that in the absence of the words non-sexual relationship, non-sexual before the word relationships, that the future field officer reading this might be led to believe by the subheading emboldened block capitals sexual liaisons, that is what this paragraph is talking about?
I think if you take the whole thing in the round, I think it becomes clearer.
Are you suggesting that it's not possible for a future SDS UCO to read this paragraph and think, I am being guided towards having a fleeting and disastrous sexual relationship with an individual who is not important to my sources of information if I have no other option?
Again, not a sexual relationship. That's not what I'm saying.
It's not quite answering my question. My question is about how it might have been read by future.
It's possible that it's written clumsily and would need revision. You're quite right.
Is it not, in fact, perfectly clear what this is really about?
It's not what was meant.
Standing back now and looking at the paragraph as a whole,
Yes.
there is no consideration here whatsoever about the legality of choosing to have a fleeting and disastrous relationship with a woman who is not close to one's sources of information, is there?
That's right.
There is no consideration of the professional conduct aspect from the point of view of the reputation of your own police force,
Right.
of having sex with a member of the public in a fleeting and disastrous way in order to protect the SDS operation.
Again, that's not the intention, but what you say is correct, that would be an inappropriate thing to say.
And although you have said it was not your position to moralise, the reality is there's no consideration in this drafting of the morality of an undercover police officer in his undercover identity, trying to have a fleeting and disastrous relationship with a member of the public, is there?
No.
There is no consideration of the impact that such a relationship might have on the deceived sexual partners concerned, is there?
There's no impact statement, no.
And they will be disproportionately female.
Correct.
There is no respect shown in this guidance for their bodies, is there?
No.
No respect for their autonomy.
No.
There is no respect shown in this guidance for the spouses or partners of the undercover officers concerned, is there?
There's not.
And they will be disproportionately female.
Correct.
But it was thought that they did not need to know
They do not need to know.
about this sort of guidance and what it might lead to.
Correct, yes.
This is completely improper advice, isn't it?
Yes, I would say it is, yes.
Unlawful?
I'm not entirely sure about whether it's lawful or unlawful.
You don't think it might be misconduct in public office, misfeasance in
Possibly,
public
yes,
office,
that's
tort
possible.
of deceit,
Yep, possible.
amoral,
Indeed.
unprofessional,
Yes?
misogynistic?
Yes. Possibly, yeah.
And it will have encouraged those who read it to behave completely inappropriately, won't it?
It's a possibility that might have happened, yeah.
And consequently to have contributed to the harm done to the women deceived by those officers.
It's a possibility that this might have been the case, yes.
Do you have any reflections now on that state of affairs?
It's not acceptable.
and your personal involvement in drafting this document?
Yes, it's not an acceptable document.
Can we go now to, on page 28, to 5.7.2? This is under the heading Involvement in Crime. The above sentiments are laudable, but the boundary between right and wrong in the SDS arena is never as clear-cut as the provisions of Con Memo 4 would have us believe. If at any time your organisation invites you to break the law, you must be prepared to take whatever advice comes from your supervisors and your colleagues. If you take part in criminal acts without the office being made aware of such a likelihood, you risk leaving the squad earlier than you expected.
Yes.
You're drafting?
I guess so, yeah.
And essentially, it comes down to don't place too much weight on Con Memo 4. The reality is different. Do what your managers tell you.
No, I'm talking here about the Con Memo 4, the thing about you shouldn't be involved in the planning and then the main act of an event, because often it was a joint enterprise with people once a conspiracy had started. So it's quite difficult to define the minor role when you're expected to be involved in the planning and the activity itself. That's what we're talking about there. It's quite common with certainly with the non-hierarchical organisations involved in activity.
Does it come back to your evidence earlier, to the effect that one has to demonstrate that one has the bottle?
Yes, well, that's part of it, but that's not, I think, what I'm dealing with here. It's about this particular element about planning, preparation and participation.
Was having the bottle the sort of phrase that was used in the office?
Possibly that would be a term used then, yes.
And it's not just restricted to those preparatory steps, is it? It's about not misleading courts.
Yes.
It's about the proportionality of committing crime as an undercover police officer.
I think in this one I'm specifically dealing with this thing about being involved in the planning, preparation and taking part in crime. This is what I'm dealing with here.
And the reality was, because the SDS regarded itself as elite and special, the rules went out of the window and supervisors and colleagues were the source of the actual rules.
Well, you just needed to go and refer to the supervisors about the situation you were facing to take advice.
Could we go on page 28 to 5.8.2, please? This is about arrest.
Yes.
One bone of contention is that if arrested, one should plead guilty and cop the fine. Groups such as the Hunt Saboteurs and the ALF will not accept such an approach to arrest in the current climate and expect a colleague to plead not guilty. Fight the case strongly, and if the case is won, the arresting officer's force will face a claim for compensation in the civil court. More and more groups are following this tendency, and unless you intend to fail to appear at court, management should support the field officer's appraisal of his situation. Each case must be looked at on its merits, so do not expect that you will be able to follow a course of action which will be accepted by your wearies.
Yes.
Is that born of some of the experiences we've been through with your own arrest?
Exactly.
And as we've been through with your own arrest, the management solution in your case involved misleading a court.
That's what we found, yes.
And it's a reality that here we see in guidance the same disregard for the courts being essentially set out.
That's simply setting out my own experiences. But you're right, the effect is as you say.
Could we go now on page 36 to paragraph 7.3.5? something we've touched upon before. The most difficult part of infiltrating the ALF is to decide how far to go. If you want to be accepted as an ALF activist, you must first get close to a relevant person, then accept invitations to commit acts of criminal damage on the windows of abusers. It is only by building up trust in this manner that you may get an invitation to ALF raids. At every action, there is a real chance of being arrested for a criminal offence. You take the risk of shortening your tour quite dramatically if you are caught. If you decide that taking part in illegal direct action is not for you, you have to work hard to become a regular supporter on the scene. Even then, without getting your hands dirty, your chance of correctly identifying an ALF activist is very low. Your words?
I think so, yeah.
Did you break windows of so-called animal abusers?
Acts of criminal damage, I describe that as the hydrofluoric acid sprayed on the butcher's window.
And if you are, I think the colloquial term is a shallow paddler, you're not going to get anywhere.
Very unlikely.
Could we take that down, please? Going to move from the Tradecraft manual to the advice which you personally gave to new undercover officers whilst you were in the SDS. I'd like to start, please, with Mark Jenner, who joined the SDS in 1995. Could we go in file 4, please, to B, Roman numeral 5(2), and that's at 37316. This is paragraph 26 of Mr. Jenner's witness statement for our Tranche 3 hearings. If we go to the end of the middle of the first page, I do not recollect any updates in my time, but I do remember being aware that Andy Coles, who was in the field when I was in the back office, had been asked to assist in writing or rewriting some of it. It's right, isn't it, that your time in the SDS overlapped a little bit?
Sorry?
Your times in the SDS overlapped a little bit.
Yes, that's right.
At the bottom of the page, I do remember having a discussion about sexual relationships. If we go over the page, the advice given was that relationships were inevitable and that eventually you would end up with no option or risk exposure. But at the time, I did not think this would happen to me, and so I did not dwell on it. My recollection is that it was Andy Coles who I spoke to about this. Did you speak to Mark Jenner about the question of sexual relationships at all?
It's possible it'd be one of the things that we would talk about as field to new people arriving into the field, yes.
And is the recollection that he has about the content of that advice correct?
I think it's, pretty much correct, yeah.
Why did you say that?
I think it goes back to the manual itself, that relationships become inevitable. You are going to have relationships with people as you're out there in the field.
No option. or
It
risk
happens.
exposure.
It happens, yeah.
You are effectively advising him that he is going to have to enter a sexual relationship at some point during his deployment, aren't you?
That's what that appears to say, that's right. I'm not entirely sure that would be the advice I'd give, but it's more to do with how to avoid relationships.
I'm going to come back to Jenna in a moment, but I'm going to digress first back to your own deployment.
Yes.
The thinking that's set out here about the inevitability of a relationship, did that thinking in fact influence your own conduct undercover?
The fact, sorry,
That a relationship was inevitable.
that relationships were inevitable, that's right, yeah.
Did that affect your own conduct undercover?
I was prepared for those risks when they came, yes.
And is the reality that you entered into a sexual relationship with Jessica?
No.
Returning to Mark Jenner, do you accept that your advice to Mr. Jenner might have influenced his conduct?
It's a possibility, yes.
Mark Jenner practiced a sexual deception on the woman we are calling Alison by entering into a 5-year-long intimate relationship during which they cohabited. Do you accept some responsibility for that happening?
I think I could have given better advice. You're absolutely right. That's awful.
Can we take that down and go to tab B, Roman numeral 5, 3, 36294. It's a UCPI number, yes, 36294. If that doesn't work, it's a curious document. It's got 2 UCPI numbers printed on it. The second is 37315-1. Thank you. This is an extract from the Tranche 3 witness statement of Jim Boyling, who, like Mark Jenner, joined the SDS in 1995. Could we go on page 2, please, to paragraph 37 at the top? I remember Andy Coles speaking to me about the relevant part of the Tradecraft manual on relationships of which he was the author. He has been a deployed undercover, but had ceased his deployment shortly before I began mine. He emphasized that it was going to happen and that I would have to decide whether to become involved or risk breaking my cover. He then goes on to deal with advice that he was given by HN1, who he describes as being particularly candid. Did you advise Jim Boyling in the manner that he was recorded in the first 5 lines of paragraph 37?
No, I don't remember, but I have no reason to doubt what he's saying.
Towards the bottom of the page, there is a sentence which reads, "It was not considered to be a major issue as it is now." Is that a fair assessment of the importance that was attached to sexual relationships in the SDS in 1995?
I can't speak as to the future here. No, I don't know.
I'm not asking you to speak to the future. When you were serving in the SDS, were sexual relationships not considered to be a major issue?
No, that's not true. That's not the case.
I'll give you a moment to cast an eye over what Jim Boyling says HN1 said to him.
Yes.
And he had had a sexual relationship undercover, hadn't he?
That's what that says, yeah. I think that's what that says.
And the advice that he is said to have given Jim Boyling is, in essence, the same advice that you have given and as is set out in the Tradecraft manual, isn't it?
I think that expands beyond where I would be comfortable, but yes, it's a very similar line, you're right.
Had you discussed this issue with HN1?
No.
Had you discussed it with other colleagues?
I don't think so.
Is your evidence that you wrote the sexual liaisons section of the Tradecraft manual in a vacuum without reference to others?
It was post-deployment, yes.
Was there any reaction to it or discussion of its contents with you?
No.
Did you know, whilst you were at any point while you were serving in the SDS, about the sexual relationship between HN1 and Liz Fuller?
No.
Are you sure about that?
I'm certain.
Did you know that he'd had a sexual relationship at all?
I didn't know that.
HN1 says that you did know.
Okay. In what way?
Is your evidence that he must be mistaken about that?
Yes, I think so. I'm not aware of that.
Did HN1 speak to you about Jessica?
I don't know.
When you mean, can you explain what you mean by don't know?
I don't know if he spoke to me about Jessica, no.
Did he speak to you about your conduct towards women in any way at all whilst you were in the SDS?
No.
We've heard evidence that a concern about your behaviour was ventilated to HN1. My question is, did he speak to you about that?
No.
Are you sure about that?
I'm absolutely sure, yes.
Did you know that Trevor Morris had had a sexual relationship with the woman who we are calling B?
No.
Did you know that he'd been involved in sexual activity with the woman we are calling Jenny?
No.
Did you know that John Dines was involved in a long-term sexual relationship with Helen Steele?
No.
Are you sure about that?
About a sexual relationship, yeah, I am sure about that.
Did you know that Peter Francis slept with women undercover?
No.
So far as Mike Chitty is concerned, presumably you did know that he'd had a sexual relationship with somebody.
Yes, the woman and the child were very self-evident, yes.
Did you know that that person was the woman we are calling Lizzie?
I didn't know the identity of the person, no.
Did managers speak about any of these sexual relationships?
None at all, no.
Are you sure about that?
About Chitty, yes. None of the others, no.
Did you ever hear or use the phrase weary wife?
I don't think I've come across that expression before, no.
Coming back to HN1, did you see HN1 and Liz Fuller together in the same circles?
Yes.
In
think so.
circumstances and displaying body language which indicated an intimate relationship?
No.
Could we take the document down now, please? Can we go to Volume 1, tab A1A, 743479. This is your 6-month post-op debrief, which we looked at very briefly earlier in your evidence. I want to explore some of its contents in a little bit more detail with you,
Yes.
please. If we start with paragraph 4 on page 3, please. I have to register my sincere praise for HN86 in his understanding of the weaknesses in the SDS system, which are now properly addressed. Can you help, please, with what the weaknesses in the SDS system were which HN86 had properly addressed?
No, I can't, I'm afraid.
Why not?
I can't remember that.
Do you recall that somebody from the SDS went to visit the FBI?
No? Did they?
Was there an influence in the SDS at the time that was at least derived from lessons learned from the FBI?
I wasn't aware of that. If you're talking about the management going to see the FBI for advice, I wasn't aware of that.
Okay. Can we look now at the next paragraph down? I think the office role is a thankless task for anyone to undertake. Any minor disagreement with office personalities or decisions are going to be blown out of all proportion by a field operative. Equally, undue sensitivity to the feelings of a field operative will enable the less scrupulous field officer to misbehave with impunity. The balance is difficult to achieve. On the one hand, the management must ensure the unit operates effectively and that the demands it places on the budget are necessary. However, the police regulations involving undercover work and ACPO guidelines are wholly inadequate to the task of running a successful SDS operation. In what respect were the police regulations and the ACPO guidelines wholly inadequate to the task of running a successful SDS operation?
I think this is the time when I was recovering from my deployment. I was quite angry about everything, emotionally dysregulated. I'm probably banging on about something that was upsetting me.
Rules like not bringing the police force into disrepute.
I remember having a conversation about willingness, if necessary, to be arrested and go to prison and come out again. That was the sort of thing I was banging on about.
We're coming to that, and the
Yeah.
attitude to the courts. Let's do that. Next paragraph. You may feel there are times when the field officer may not have been wholly open to the office staff about his or her actions while undercover. You would be right.
Yeah.
You're essentially signalling to your managers that officers hide things from their managers.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I was thinking specifically there about a particular paranoid behaviour that I had, and worrying about being followed away and being connected to my real home address. And I behaved in a very strange, paranoid way, which, had I talked about it, might have worried them unduly.
And you didn't talk to management because you didn't want to be taken away from
That's right, yeah.
the SDS
Yeah.
operation.
I felt I was controlling it.
The worst thing to hear when you are out in the field is that you will be sent back if you are compromised, or that your arrest is an immediate problem relating to the security of the operation.
Yeah.
Ideally, one should be told that one's tenure in the field will stand or fall on your remaining in role. The fact that one is arrested is immaterial. Misleading a court is something done by criminals and government ministers alike. We shouldn't be squeamish about the ends justifying the means in our own case. The danger is if one is compromised and fails to report the fact and make preparations to leave the field, both for one's personal safety and for the credibility of the unit within MPSB as a whole. Of course, if one is realistic, one knows that we have to play the game, but it is essential for the SDS supervisors to interfere only when absolutely necessary. I would have been prepared to face arrest, remand in custody, and possibly spend some time in prison. I doubt anyone in MPSB management could cope with that sort of freedom being given to an officer engaged in SDS work. Can you help us in your own words as to what was driving that paragraph?
This is me, Mr. Angry, disappointed with the restrictions that are around the role. The inability to, and obviously you can't do these things, but I'm railing against the machine, if you like.
Because you thought that there should be more leeway to execute the mission.
I was just talking about the restrictions and the fact that it gets in the way of being truly able to deliver what you want to deliver. There are limits that prevent what you can do.
Can I take that as a yes?
No, I was quite clear about what I was saying.
But you thought there were restrictions which impeded your ability to do your job.
Yeah, well, yes, in short, yes, okay.
And misleading the court, something done by criminals and government ministers alike we shouldn't be squeamish about. The natural implication of that is you are advocating misleading courts.
Yes, I'm talking about the fact that there are restrictions on what we can do, yes.
Although, as we've been through, restrictions which weren't observed in practice.
In my particular case, you're right, yes.
Would you have been prepared to face arrest, remand, and incarceration?
I can remember this discussion about could you handle that situation, but it was theoretical. It was not something I would have truly considered, no. And this is post-deployment when I'm pretty dysregulated at this stage.
And in no actual risk of going to prison?
No, of course not, no.
these were your answers about, you were asked questions which included what the problems were that you'd encountered and things like that. We can go to the questions if necessary. But in responding to questions as part of this debrief about what the problems in your deployment were, there's no mention of sexual advances being a problem or of obsessive females wanting a relationship. Why is that?
Because I felt I managed that adequately myself, I guess.
Not an issue.
Not for me, no.
No mention of investigative journalists who might follow you home.
No, I dealt with that.
So if we look at the document at 735454, page 4, this is notes of a meeting at your home. Relationships. I had Lucy, the dog.
Yes.
Pushing them back was difficult. I managed myself. I had picks, props to support. I looked as ugly as I could. If someone was interested, was a nightmare. 1 or 2 fell foul. That is the notes of what you said on the question of dealing with relationships, isn't it?
Yes, that's, I think, right, yes.
Pushing them back. That's because you were portraying a picture of women making sexual advances to you, weren't you?
Talking about the difficulty of avoiding a relationship in the field, yes.
Despite looking as ugly as you could.
Scruffy and horrible, yes.
You're saying that to Operation Hearn on the 2nd of May 2013.
Right.
But in your post-operative debrief, when you're asked what the problems in your relationship were, having to push back sexual advances from women was not there.
No.
Is that because the reality was that despite making yourself as ugly as you could, you weren't the subject of sexual advances such as you were having to push back?
There were 1 or 2 of them. I think I've discussed this before.
The suggestion that you had to share a bed with Jessica in order to hide from investigative journalists is not there, is it?
Well, that's not... It's about staying over at the East London address. That's what we were talking about.
Isn't the reality, if these problems had been real, they would have been mentioned in your post-operative debrief?
I think unlikely. It's not a great document to read. It's clearly that I'm disturbed by my experiences. It's not a particularly logical piece of work, that.
We can go back now to the debrief itself, 743479. Paragraph 18, page 6. This is specifically about various problems.
Yes.
I was not tempted into drug taking since it was not a new experience. We looked at that yesterday. Always drunk less than the government recommended maximum. Shoplifting is a tradition. And you set out and addressed those 3 problems. in response to a specific question about drugs, alcohol, and offending.
Yes.
You weren't asked specifically about temptation to enter into sexual relations with members of the public in your undercover identity.
No.
Was that because that was not an issue that really concerned them?
It wasn't one of the questions.
Was that because it wasn't an issue which really concerned them?
One would think not if it wasn't mentioned, but I can't speak as to that.
Could we take that document down now, please? In file 2, could we go to tab B, little 1, 51? I'll give you a number in just a second. It is 731708. This is a document described as a final draft, a report on special branch undercover work. The memorandum is signed by you in your capacity as a SO12 training officer. On the 12th of February, I think it's meant to read 1996.
Yes, that's right.
Been sent to the superintendent of CE squad. If we go over the page, we see that you are here writing a draft report about paragraph 1, an initial response to issues of training in undercover work which have been highlighted by Superintendent TN61. While the purpose of this research document is to consider preparing a training package to assist MPS BDCs new to CE squad in attending meetings of target groups and short-term single-issue campaigns, the research may be relevant to B squad officers and indeed other force special branches who may wish to receive similar training to deal with specific campaigns on their own areas, particularly relating to animal rights campaigns and environmental protests. Paragraph 2, the most important, under the heading, the implications for SDS. The most important part of this exercise is to ensure that SDS techniques are not compromised in any way. The SDS Fieldcraft Manual gives clear guidance on how to develop an alternative identity for long-term deep cover. These alternative identities will stand up to close scrutiny by a hostile inquiry. It is proposed that the level of protection required for short-term operations by desk officers is of a lower standard, only to the extent of enabling posts to be sent to the individual officer in his or her assumed name and perhaps the use of a telephone number. So, would it be right to say that the purpose of this document, in a training capacity, you're drafting a document to help short-term undercover operations by desk officers?
It's trying to codify what was common practice about attending meetings and gathering information as a desk officer rather than as a UC. So it's using UC techniques but as a desk officer. So it was sort of an amalgam, because what had happened in the past was that there was very little turnover of staff and there was adequate supervision of a new DC by a DS from the desk at all times. When the transition into tenure came in, then that level of experience wasn't available. So the idea was to codify that in some way.
If we look at the next page, page 3, paragraph 4, under the heading Assumed Name, please. The primary need of an officer employed against a short to medium-term target is to obtain an assumed name and paperwork to corroborate that identity. The officer can either make up a false name or attend St. Catherine's House to find a suitable name and rough date of birth from birth records. Either ploy would provide a suitable alias. corroboration of a false name is simple enough. The officer can purchase an LTE photo pass, club membership card, or similar forms of low-level ID. All are cheap and easy to obtain and will satisfy the idle curiosity of a fellow activist. Yeah. Two questions that arise from that. Am I to understand the second half of that paragraph as explaining how one can quickly and easily think up a false name, obtain some low-level identity to back it up, which will perhaps assist with superficial scrutiny?
If you're challenged at a meeting, yes, you have stuff on you that will prove that you are who you say you are and where you live.
The second question, why in February 1996 is a document being drafted which leaves open the option of attending St Catherine's House to find a suitable name and rough date of birth from birth records?
The plan was to go, rather than going to the individual birth certificates, which was to go to the registers that were quarterly, and if you're thinking of a particular name, to look down and see how many of them, say if you're using a very, very common surname, you could then find how many of that common surname were in the book, and you would therefore be able to write something. So if someone were to take a cursory attempt to find out who you are, and this did happen, then there would be a record that would link against that name. But by that time, you'd be out of the way. It wasn't to be in the way of using a dead person's cover, for example. It was just to link into the registries.
Suitable name and rough date of birth.
Within that quarter, yes.
So you would be purporting to be someone for whom there was an entry in the register?
There'd be well, you wouldn't be able to link that person to what you were saying because you're using your own date of birth that you've made up, but you'd be looking at a very common name and the number of people using that name and identify one of those to be your false name that you'll be using as a desk officer.
Well, if the intention was to withstand some scrutiny, somebody checking the register of birth, presumably you would need a name which matched the date of birth for the entry.
Yes, but you're dealing here with quarters of the year, so there's quite a lot of names with the same surname.
I understand that, but you are having to pick one of those so that you have a name and a date of birth.
Not a date of birth, no.
Well, why have you said suitable name and rough date of birth?
Yes.
So within that quarter?
Yes, that's right.
So you're finding a name within that quarter, and if somebody looks up the quarterly reports, it will withstand scrutiny.
There they are, yes.
Borrowing a bit of somebody's identity.
A bit of someone's identity, that's right.
And that was considered perfectly all right in 1996?
That was a proposal about how one might possibly provide that sort of cover. This is the draft. It never actually happened, but that's the draft.
What never actually happened?
This course.
The course.
Yeah.
You said it was codifying what was actually happening.
It was trying to replace what was happening when you had an experienced DS with a new DC who'd be able to mentor them through that process and show them how to deal with it. When that was missing, they didn't have that sort of support. What I was asked to provide was something that would give someone that sort of advice and resilience that wasn't a qualified supervisor who could do it.
Were short-term undercover operations conducted by desk officers, conducted by officers who'd been advised that they could use this technique?
No, this never came into fruition.
Had it already been happening?
Well, I think as I was, as I was explaining, it was you would go along, the DS would deploy you, and there wasn't this sort of level of protection. So you just go on and busk it as a desk officer going to a public meeting.
Thank you. So would that be a convenient moment to take the afternoon break?
Certainly. We'll resume in quarter of an hour.